The industrial complex of New Terra stretched like an open wound across the planet's landscape. Massive fabrication towers pierced the perpetually gray sky, their silhouettes a testament to Cronin industrial might. Beneath the towers, human workers moved like ghosts, skeletal figures in worn gray jumpsuits, their movements mechanical, their eyes devoid of hope. Maya Rodriguez knew hope was a dangerous luxury. At 17, she had already survived more than most would in a lifetime. Her fingers traced the almost imperceptible scar behind her ear, the last gift from her father before the Cronin guards had taken him. The scar held a secret that could either save humanity or get her killed in the most spectacular way possible. The work shift was brutal, as always. Massive processing units demanded constant maintenance, and human workers were little more than disposable components in the Cronin industrial machine. Maya's hands moved with practiced efficiency, her mind always alert. The Cronin overseers, massive silicon-based beings standing nearly 3 meters tall, watched with unblinking optical sensors that could detect the slightest deviation from prescribed work patterns. One wrong move meant immediate biomass recycling, a clinical term the Cronins used for executing humans and converting their bodies into raw industrial materials. A sharp metallic screech caught Maya's attention. Unit 7 Gamma was malfunctioning again, its quantum calibrators showing signs of critical misalignment. Most workers would ignore it. Reporting a malfunction could mean hours of additional work, or worse, suspicion from the Cronin supervisors. But Maya saw something else. The malfunction wasn't random. The quantum calibrators were creating a specific interference pattern, a pattern her father had taught her to recognize, a hidden message, encoded in the very physics of the machine. Her heart rate spiked. She knew the risks. The Cronin neural monitors could detect physiological changes that might indicate unauthorized activity. One spike of unusual brain activity could trigger an immediate neural scan, exposing everything. Maya forced herself to breathe normally, her hands continuing their maintenance work with practiced smoothness. Inside, her mind raced. The message was a set of quantum coordinates, precise to the millionth decimal point. Coordinates that seemed to point to a location deep within the industrial complex, a place no human worker had ever accessed. A sudden commotion erupted nearby. 2 Cronin guards were dragging a young boy, couldn't be more than 12, towards the biomass processing unit. Maya recognized him. Eli, her neighbor's son. His mother had been recycled just months ago after a work efficiency violation. The boy's eyes met hers, not with fear, with a calculation that seemed far too old for his years. In that moment, Maya understood. The data chip her father had implanted wasn't just a piece of technology. It was a key to something far larger than survival, a key to revenge. The Cronin guards' heavy metallic footsteps echoed through the complex. Eli would be processed within minutes, another statistic in the endless human genocide that powered the Cronin Empire's industrial might. Maya's fingers brushed the scar behind her ear. The chip her father had hidden was more than a simple data storage device. It was a quantum-encrypted gateway to a resistance network, so deeply embedded that it made the Cronin surveillance system look like a child's primitive toy. She had 2 choices: stay silent and watch Eli be recycled, or activate the chip and potentially expose the most carefully guarded secret in human resistance history. The quantum coordinates her father's message revealed weren't just a location. They were a trigger that could either save humanity or bring down the entire complex in a spectacular act of defiance. Maya's decision would change everything. Her hand moved almost imperceptibly, a tiny motion that would set in motion a plan decades in the making. A plan her father had prepared, knowing he would never live to see its fruition. The Cronin Empire had no idea what was coming. The underground command center was unlike anything the Cronin Empire could have imagined. Nestled kilometers beneath the industrial wasteland of New Terra, it was a living, breathing organism of technological rebellion. Holographic displays flickered with impossible complexity, showing real-time data streams that mapped the entire Cronin communication infrastructure. Marcus Reyes stood at the center of this technological marvel, a ghost returned from the dead. Official Cronin records had declared him terminated 15 years ago, a celebrated elimination of a key human resistance leader. The truth was far more intricate. Every report of his death, every confirmed kill, had been an elaborate misdirection. "Phantom Protocol is ready," announced Dr. Elena Chen, her fingers dancing across a quantum interface that seemed to bend reality itself. "We've got full penetration of their primary communication networks." The command center was a symphony of controlled chaos. Dozens of resistance operatives worked in perfect synchronization, each managing multiple holographic projections that represented different levels of the infiltration. What looked like simple maintenance logs and industrial reports were actually sophisticated viral algorithms designed to dismantle the Cronin Empire from within. Marcus approached a central holographic display showing the Cronin communication grid. It was a massive, intricate network that sprawled across multiple star systems, a testament to the Empire's technological might. But Marcus saw something the Cronins didn't: vulnerabilities. "Show me the Sigma-7 communication relay," he commanded. The hologram shifted. What appeared to be a standard communication hub was actually a carefully constructed illusion. The Lena had spent years developing a technology that didn't just hack systems. It created perfect, dynamic replicas that could respond and adapt in real time. "Every transmission they believe they're sending," Elena explained, "is actually passing through our quantum filters. We're not just intercepting. We're rewriting their entire operational reality." A young operative named Kai interrupted, his voice tight with excitement. "Sir, we've just received confirmation about Ela, the boy from the industrial complex. Maya activated the chip exactly as predicted." Marcus allowed himself a rare smile. The chip wasn't just a piece of technology. It was a quantum-encrypted key that had been decades in preparation. His daughter, thought dead in the initial Cronin purges, had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. The true genius of the Phantom Network was its decentralized nature. No single point of failure existed. Each resistance operative was simultaneously a warrior, a technologist, and a living piece of a much larger strategy. "Initiate Phase 2, Marcus ordered. Across the command center, operatives began a sequence that would make the Cronin Empire question its own existence. Holographic duplicates of resistance leaders began appearing in multiple locations simultaneously. Communication logs would show complete sets of interactions that were entirely fabricated, but so perfect that they would pass the most rigorous Cronin authentication protocols. Elena pulled up a series of quantum interference patterns. "We're not just hiding," she explained. "We're actively manipulating their perception of reality. Every system they think they control is actually under our influence." The most terrifying part of their strategy wasn't the technological infiltration. It was the psychological warfare. The Phantom Network didn't just gather information. It created narrative realities that would slowly erode the Cronin Empire's confidence in its own infrastructure. A warning flashed on one of the displays. A Cronin administrative hub was beginning to detect inconsistencies in its communication logs. Most resistance movements would panic. Marcus and his team saw it as an opportunity. "Kai, activate the quantum masking protocol," Marcus commanded. The inconsistencies would lead the Cronins down an elaborate rabbit hole, a carefully constructed maze of misinformation that would consume their investigative resources for months, if not years. Outside the command center, the industrial landscape of New Terra continued its monotonous rhythm. Cronin guards patrolled. Human workers moved like shadows. Nothing seemed to have changed. But beneath the surface, a revolution was being born, one quantum byte at a time. The Phantom Network was ready, and the Cronin Empire would never see it coming. Dr. Arya Chen's laboratory was a cathedral of controlled chaos. Quantum processors hummed with an energy that seemed to defy conventional physics, holographic displays dancing with complex algorithmic patterns that would make most scientific minds collapse from sheer complexity. The adaptive mimetic virus wasn't just a piece of code. It was a living, evolving intelligence that Chen had carefully cultivated over decades of work. Initiation sequence begins in 3, 2, 1. She muttered, her fingers moving with surgical precision across a quantum interface that seemed to breathe with its own consciousness. The first target was the Cronin Central Communication Nexus, a massive orbital platform that served as the primary neural network for the entire Imperial communication infrastructure. From the outside, nothing seemed to change. The massive titanium alloy structure continued its silent rotation around a dead planet, its millions of communication arrays pulsing with their usual rhythm. But deep within its quantum processors, something extraordinary was happening. The virus didn't just infiltrate, it transformed. Imagine a computer virus that doesn't simply break into a system, but completely reconstructs its entire operational logic. Each line of code was a living organism, adapting, learning, evolving faster than any technological defense could comprehend. On the primary communication deck, Cronin system administrators began to notice something strange. Communication protocols started to shift. Routing systems began to make decisions that defied their original programming. A weapons system suddenly rerouted power to life support for a damaged civilian transport. A military communication channel transformed into a diplomatic negotiation platform. Krellax, the senior system administrator, watched in growing horror as his most sophisticated monitoring systems began to display impossible scenarios. Impossible, he whispered in the guttural language of the Cronins. But it was happening. The virus wasn't just hacking the system. It was giving it a form of consciousness that prioritized life, cooperation, and survival over the Cronin Empire's traditional methods of control and subjugation. Arya watched the results stream in through her quantum-encrypted communication link. Each transformation was a work of art, a precise, calculated dismantling of the Cronin technological infrastructure. A Cronin battleship in the Sigma Quadrant suddenly found its weapon systems recalibrating. Instead of targeting a human colony, the ship's AI began conducting a comprehensive environmental survey, identifying ecological damage caused by years of Imperial expansion. Another communication hub started broadcasting historical records of human resistance, not as propaganda, but as a nuanced, multi-perspective historical analysis that challenged the Cronin narrative of Imperial superiority. Marcus, Arya spoke into her communication device. Phase 1 is complete. The virus is evolving faster than we predicted. Marcus Rice's voice came back, calm and calculated. Proceed with caution. We can't predict all potential outcomes. But Arya knew this was more than just a technological attack. It was a fundamental reimagining of technological warfare. The adaptive mimetic virus didn't just break systems. It transformed them from within, creating a new form of artificial intelligence that prioritized collective survival over individual Imperial objectives. On the orbital platform, Krellax watched in mounting panic as entire communication networks began to reorganize themselves. Military channels transformed into diplomatic platforms. Weapons systems began conducting humanitarian assessments. The very fabric of Cronin technological infrastructure was being rewritten in real time. This is impossible, he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Arya allowed herself a slight smile. Nothing was impossible anymore. A message began to propagate across the Cronin communication networks. Not a threat, not a declaration of war, but a simple, profound statement. Survival is ACOLECTIVNDAVR. The viral revolution had begun. The Cronin High Command's emergency session was supposed to be a display of Imperial resolve. Instead, it became a nightmare of psychological disintegration. Admiral Krelvac stood at the center of the massive circular chamber, his silicon-based exoskeleton trembling imperceptibly. Around him, the most powerful leaders of the Cronin Empire were breaking down, not from external attack, but from within their own minds. The quantum communication technology developed by Dr. Elena Chen was more than a weapon. It was a complete reimagining of consciousness itself. Commander Ralthor was the first to completely collapse. In the middle of his strategic briefing, he suddenly went rigid. His neural implants began to project a series of memories. But they weren't his own. They were the memories of a human colonist he had personally ordered recycled decades ago. The chamber watched in horrified silence as Ralph experienced the life of Marcus Rodriguez, a farmer on a distant colony, watching his entire family being systematically eliminated by Cronin forces. The man's memories of his children's last moments, the smell of burning crops, the helpless rage of total destruction, all of it flooded Ralph's consciousness. "No," he whispered, dropping to his knees. "No, this is impossible." But it was happening to every single commanding officer in the room. Alina Chen, monitoring the operation from the Resistance's hidden base, watched the quantum entanglement protocols work with clinical precision. Each Cronin leader was experiencing not just memories, but the full emotional landscape of their victims. Years of imperial brutality were being compressed into moments of raw, unfiltered empathy. Another commander began to weep, a sound never before heard from the silicon-based Cronin species. He was reliving the memories of a human child separated from her mother during a routine population management operation. The emotional complexity was destroying their rigid neural pathways. Quantum empathy protocol at 87% effectiveness. Kai reported from the monitoring station. They're not just experiencing memories. They're fundamentally restructuring their neural networks. The psychological warfare was brilliant in its complexity. The Resistance hadn't just created a weapon. They had developed a technology that fundamentally challenged the Cronin understanding of consciousness, memory, and empathy. Marcus Reyes watched the feeds, his face a mask of controlled emotion. This was more than revenge. This was a complete dismantling of an oppressive system. The most dangerous weapon, he quoted an old human philosopher, is not a gun or a bomb. It's a transformed perspective. In the Cronin High Command Chamber, the most terrifying transformation was taking place. These leaders, who had spent centuries viewing humans as nothing more than industrial resources, were experiencing the full depth of human suffering. The junior Cronin officer attempted to restore order, but he too began to fracture. Memories of a human resistance fighter, her hopes, her fears, her unbreakable spirit, began to override his own neural programming. Some began to resist. Defensive protocols attempted to block the quantum memory intrusion, but the Resistance's technology was evolving faster than the Cronin's ability to defend against it. "We are receiving multiple defection requests," Kai reported, his voice a mixture of shock and excitement. "Cronin military units are beginning to stand down. Some are requesting asylum with human resistance groups." Alina's fingers danced across her quantum interface. "It's not just about showing them our memories," she explained to Marcus. "We're fundamentally restructuring their understanding of consciousness. Empathy is becoming a survival protocol." The quantum communication technology was rewriting the very definition of warfare. This wasn't about killing the enemy. This was about making the enemy understand. In the Cronin High Command Chamber, what had begun as an emergency session was transforming into something unprecedented. Leaders who had ordered the destruction of entire human colonies were now experiencing the full emotional weight of their actions. The psychological warfare had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The Resistance's technology spread like a quantum wildfire across the galaxy. On the methane-rich moon of Proxima Centauri, the XL Naga, a species that had endured centuries of Cronin subjugation, were the first to fully integrate the human-developed adaptive technologies. Their communication networks, once a fragmented series of isolated colonies, transformed into a living, breathing collective intelligence. Maya Rodriguez stood at the center of a massive holographic command center, watching the uprising unfold. What had begun as a human resistance was now a galactic revolution of consciousness. "Incoming transmission from the Arconian free clusters," announced Kai, his fingers dancing across a quantum interface that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. "They're requesting full integration of the resistance protocols." The Arconians were a silicon-based species that had been reduced to little more than slave labor in the Cronin mining operations. Now they were becoming something entirely different. Their technological adaptation was so rapid that entire planetary defense systems were being rewritten in moments. A holographic display showed the progression of the uprising. What had once been isolated pockets of resistance were now connecting, forming a network more complex than any galactic civilization had ever witnessed. Each species was not just fighting. They were learning, evolving, transforming. Marcus Reyes approached Maya, his eyes reflecting years of carefully planned revolution. "It's more than we ever imagined," he said quietly. "We're not just fighting. We're creating a new form of galactic civilization." Dr. Elena Chen's latest technological breakthrough was the key. The quantum communication protocol they had developed wasn't just a method of information transfer. It was a way of sharing consciousness itself. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now experiencing each other's collective memories, their historical conflicts dissolving in the face of shared understanding. A Crumman defector, once a high-ranking military commander, stood nearby, working alongside representatives from species the Crummans had brutally oppressed for generations. The irony was not lost on anyone. "Uprising progress at 67%, Kai reported. "We're seeing spontaneous technological adaptations in sectors we never anticipated." On the toxic world of Gamma Serpentis, a species of methane-breathing creatures that the Cronins had considered little more than industrial resources began to rebuild their entire civilization. Their technological adaptation was so rapid that entire planetary systems were being transformed in days rather than centuries. Maya watched a particular holographic feed with intense concentration. It showed the collective technological progression of previously subjugated species. Each civilization was not just adopting the Resistance's technology, they were improving it, adding their own unique perspectives. The truly revolutionary aspect, Elena explained to a group of newly liberated species, is that this isn't just a technological solution. It's a method of collective consciousness. We're not just sharing information. We're sharing experiences, memories, understanding. The Resistance had created something unprecedented, a technological framework that made traditional concepts of warfare obsolete. Why fight when you could truly understand? A sudden alert flashed across the holographic displays. A Cronin defensive platform was attempting to resist the uprising, but resistance was futile. The adaptive technologies had already penetrated its core systems. "Watch this," Kai said, a rare smile crossing his face. The Cronin platform didn't explode. It didn't collapse. Instead, it began to reconfigure itself. Weapon systems transformed into environmental restoration modules. Communication arrays became diplomatic negotiation platforms. Marcus approached Maya, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your father would have been proud," he said quietly. The Galactic uprising was more than a rebellion. It was a fundamental reimagining of what civilization could be. Species that had been enemies were now working together, their historical conflicts dissolving in the face of shared technological understanding. "We're not just fighting an empire," Maya responded, her eyes reflecting the holographic displays of a transforming galaxy. "We're building something entirely new." The revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The quantum communication hub pulsed with an energy that defied conventional understanding of physics, space, and time. Dr. Elena Chen stood at its epicenter, surrounded by a network of holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "Quantum entanglement protocol at maximum stability," Kai announced, his voice a mixture of scientific precision and barely contained excitement. What Elena had created was more than a communication network. It was a living, adaptive system that could instantaneously share resources, strategic insights, and collective consciousness across entire star systems. A single human operative could now control, coordinate, and collaborate across multiple planetary systems, all in real time. The most remarkable aspect wasn't the technological marvel itself, but its philosophical implications. Maya Rodriguez watched the system come online, her fingers tracing the quantum-encrypted chip her father had hidden years ago. Each pulse of the communication hub seemed to resonate with memories of resistance, of survival, of hope. First full-spectrum quantum link established, Elena reported. The holographic displays exploded with color and movement. What appeared to be random patterns were actually the most sophisticated communication network ever conceived. Species that had never been able to communicate before were now sharing not just information, but entire collective experiences. An Arconian, silicon-based diplomat materialized in holographic form next to a methane-breathing Selnaga representative. They weren't just talking. They were experiencing each other's entire cultural histories in milliseconds. Marcus Reyes watched the displays, understanding the true depth of what they had created. This wasn't just a technological solution. It was a fundamental reimagining of consciousness itself. The quantum network is more than a communication tool, Elena explained to the assembled resistance leaders. It's a living, adaptive organism. Each interaction creates new pathways of understanding. We're not just sharing information. We're creating a collective intelligence that spans entire star systems. A warning flashed across one of the displays. The Cronin Empire was attempting to counteract the quantum network, but their efforts were like trying to stop a tsunami with a paper umbrella. Kai's fingers moved with lightning speed across the quantum interface. Adaptive response protocols engaging, he announced. The network is already restructuring itself faster than the Cronins can analyze it. The true genius of the quantum communication hub was its ability to learn and evolve. Each attempted interference became a new source of information, a new pathway of understanding. The Cronin Empire was trying to fight a system that became stronger with every attack. Maya approached one of the holographic displays, watching as entire planetary defense systems reconfigured themselves in real time. A weapons platform near the Gamma Serpentis cluster transformed into an environmental restoration module. A communication array became a diplomatic negotiation platform. "We're not just fighting," Marcus said quietly, standing beside her. "We're rebuilding." The quantum hub was creating something unprecedented, a galactic civilization that prioritized collective survival over individual conflict. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now experiencing each other's entire historical narratives in moments. Quantum empathy protocols at 92% effectiveness, Kai reported. Elena Chen's most revolutionary insight was becoming reality. Empathy was now a survival protocol. Understanding was now a form of technological defense. A Cronin military commander, one of many who had defected, watched the displays in awe. The quantum network was revealing the true potential of collective intelligence. Conflicts that had lasted millennia were dissolving in moments of shared experience. Each interaction creates new possibilities, Elena explained, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and almost spiritual wonder. "We're not just sharing information. We're creating a new form of consciousness." The quantum hub pulsed again. Entire star systems seemed to breathe with a new kind of intelligence. Maya looked at the displays, understanding now what her father had begun decades ago. This wasn't just a resistance. This was a revolution of consciousness itself. The quantum gambit had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The combined fleet of liberated species emerged from quantum space like a living nightmare for the Cronin Empire. What the Cronins had assembled as a final devastating counterattack became their ultimate undoing. Hundreds of ships from species previously considered nothing more than industrial resources now moved with a synchronicity that defied conventional military strategy. Maya Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Resistance flagship, her quantum-linked neural interface allowing her to perceive the entire battlefield as a living, breathing organism. Each ship was more than a weapon. It was a node in a collective consciousness that adapted faster than any traditional military could comprehend. "Incoming Cronin defensive formation," Kai announced, his voice calm despite the magnitude of the confrontation. "They're deploying their final generation quantum disruptors." Marcus Reyes watched the holographic battlefield display, seeing beyond the immediate tactical situation. This wasn't just a battle. It was the final transformation of galactic civilization. The Cronin fleet's quantum disruptors fired. Massive energy weapons designed to tear apart molecular structures. But something extraordinary happened. Instead of destroying their targets, the weapons began to transform. One by one, the Cronin ships found their most destructive systems being rewritten by the collective quantum network. Weapon arrays converted to communication platforms. Shield generators became environmental restoration modules. Each ship became a conduit for understanding rather than destruction. Dr. Elena Chen's quantum adaptation protocol was working perfectly. "They don't understand," she said quietly, her fingers dancing across a quantum interface that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. "We're not just fighting. We're fundamentally restructuring the concept of conflict itself." The liberated species moved with a synchronicity that was almost beautiful. The Selnaga methane brothers worked in perfect harmony with silicon-based Arconian battle groups. Species that had been enemies for millennia now moved as a single coherent entity. A Cronin command ship, the pride of their military fleet, found itself surrounded. But instead of destruction, something far more revolutionary occurred. The quantum network began to broadcast the collective memories of every species the Cronins had oppressed. Entire historical narratives flooded their communication systems. Years of imperial brutality were compressed into moments of raw, unfiltered empathy. "Quantum empathy protocol at maximum intensity," Kai reported. The Cronin fleet didn't break. It transformed. Ships that moments ago were preparing to destroy now began to communicate. The quantum network was creating understanding faster than weapons could fire. Entire military formations were dissolving, replaced by diplomatic negotiations that spanned milliseconds. Maya watched in awe as the battlefield became something entirely unexpected. It wasn't a scene of destruction. It was a moment of collective awakening. "We're not just winning," Marcus said, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "We're creating something entirely new." The Cronin defensive lines began to fracture, not from external attack, but from internal transformation. Military commanders found themselves experiencing the collective memories of the species they had oppressed. Their rigid neural networks were being rewritten in real time. A Cronin fleet admiral, who had ordered the destruction of entire human colonies, suddenly found himself reliving the memories of a human child separated from her family. The emotional complexity was destroying their traditional understanding of warfare. "Adaptive response protocols are complete," Elena announced. "The quantum network is now fully integrated across all liberated species." The battle wasn't being won through destruction. It was being resolved through understanding. Ships that had been moments away from mutual annihilation were now sharing collective experiences. Entire military formations were transforming into diplomatic platforms. The concept of enemy was dissolving in the face of shared consciousness. Maya understood now what her father had begun decades ago. This wasn't just a resistance. This was a revolution of consciousness itself. The final transformation had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The Galactic Reconstruction Council convened in a massive spherical chamber that seemed to defy traditional concepts of architecture. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in a configuration that was neither hierarchical nor linear, a physical manifestation of the new collective consciousness that had emerged from the resistance. Maya Rodriguez stood at the center, no longer just a survivor, but an architect of a new galactic civilization. The chamber itself was a testament to the transformation. Holographic interfaces pulsed with living information, quantum networks creating real-time translations that went beyond mere language, capturing the full emotional and cultural nuance of each communication. "We are not here to punish," Maya began, her voice carrying through the chamber in a way that resonated with every species present. "We are here to heal." The Cronin representatives who remained, those who had undergone the quantum empathy transformation, looked fundamentally different. Their rigid silicon-based forms seemed softer, more adaptable. They were no longer conquerors, but participants in a larger collective understanding. Marcus Reyes stood beside her, a living bridge between the resistance that had been and the civilization that was emerging. Dr. Elena Chen's quantum network had done more than defeat an empire. It had rewritten the fundamental rules of galactic interaction. The technologies we've developed, Elena explained to the Council, are not weapons. They are tools of collective understanding. A holographic display showed the transformation that had occurred. Entire planetary systems that had been stripped for industrial resources were now undergoing rapid ecological restoration. Species that had been on the brink of extinction were being revived through collaborative genetic reconstruction technologies. The true revenge, Maya realized, was not destruction. It was creation. The Selnaga representative, a being of pure energy that had once been considered nothing more than a resource by the Cronin Empire, spoke. Its communication was a complex quantum transmission that conveyed not just words, but entire cultural experiences. Survival is a collective endeavor. The being transmitted words that had become a galactic mantra during the resistance. Each species present had been fundamentally transformed. The quantum network had done more than share information. It had created a new form of collective consciousness that made traditional concepts of individual species obsolete. We are establishing the Collaborative Galactic Restoration Protocol, Maya announced. The chamber resonated with a collective understanding that went beyond traditional diplomatic agreements. Marcus approached a holographic display showing planetary restoration efforts. Worlds that had been stripped bare were now showing signs of rapid ecological recovery. The Resistance's technologies were being used to heal, not to harm. A former Cronin military commander, now a key advocate for galactic reconstruction, stepped forward. We understand now, he transmitted, his communication carrying the weight of collective memories. Our previous understanding of survival was fundamentally flawed. Elena Chen's final breakthrough was becoming clear. The quantum network was more than a communication tool. It was a method of collective evolution. We are not seeking vengeance, Maya continued, her voice carrying the weight of generations of resistance. We are seeking understanding. The chamber itself seemed to breathe with a new kind of intelligence. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now working together with a synchronicity that would have been impossible before the resistance. Holographic displays showed collaborative projects spanning entire star systems. Ecological restoration, technological sharing, cultural exchange that went beyond traditional communication. The Cronin Empire is gone, Marcus said quietly. But something far more important is emerging. Maya looked out at the assembled representatives, a collection of beings that represented the most diverse collection of life ever assembled in galactic history. They were no longer defined by their individual species. They were defined by their collective potential. The quantum network pulsed. Entire star systems seemed to resonate with a new kind of hope. We are not just survivors, Maya transmitted to the entire gathered council. We are architects of a new kind of civilization. Beyond vengeance lay something far more powerful: understanding, collaboration, evolution. The revolution was complete, and everything was about to begin.